Rob as well, and the university for the invitation to be able to present the work of my office here this evening in conjunction with the publication manual section. But I also want to start by acknowledging Rob's is here for all your work on the exhibition and for really coordinating it. It looks fantastic, so thank you so much. So I'm going to talk about tonight is the work that went into this book manual section, but really in respect to the work we did in the office and have been doing for 21 years. Collaborative, it's very much a collaborative small studio located in New York City. And it's work that, we've worked on sections since we started, and particularly when we were working on construction drawings, you're almost inevitably doing some kind of section to be able to communicate to a contractor. But for us, section is also the way in which we really examine space, particularly through two-point perspective sectional cutaways. This allows one drawing to see a whole range of things, particularly useful for competitions when board sizes are really limited. We've also used it as a way of stitching drawings together, linking one section perspective with another to show the relationship between one floor to the other with a kind of hybrid representation between hand drawing and digital media. Also been very interested, and this goes back to work, and this is a 22-year-old model, where we're at that point really excited about the opportunity to be able to do a section model drawing for an exhibition to reveal the spatial condition and the drawing condition of which simultaneously so they show the two things together. But what we realized in starting and looking and teaching is that there wasn't really a good discourse for section. In other words, there wasn't in English a published book on section. You can find lots of books on plans, on axonometrics, on how to do perspectives, but almost nothing really written substantially, other than a couple of articles, on this really well-known section type. More importantly, you couldn't find a single really comprehensive history of section. Now, when did section drawings start? You can date plans very long way back, but sections, they come into architectural practice relatively late. And so we wanted to be able to do a publication that would combine the history of architecture with an examination of how to talk about sections with a play in terms of what our work is. And I'd like to be able to do all of those tonight. In part by starting with the history. And this is, we think, one of the earlier section drawings, and it's barely a section drawing, right? And it's a section drawing only because this moment cuts away the side of the cathedral to reveal the buttresses that trace the lines down. In view of the Honneport Reims Cathedral, demonstrating an early drawing that tries to aesthetic. Its subject, though, isn't really here. Its subject is the elevation of structure. Right? You only really get the development of the section drawing, which is essentially a vertical cut, as opposed to a plan, which is a horizontal cut. A vertical cut through the building in the Renaissance, particularly in the 1480s to the turn of the century. You get two things happening. One, architects looking at ruins, so the buildings are already sectioned, right, drawing those, and interest in anatomy, particularly in the work of Leonardo, where they're cutting quite literally through the body and drawing literally the cut body. You can see here, this is literally the cut, as they're cut into the skull to see it. There are these two ways of looking at the section as a way of seeing past the world that you see with the naked eye. It only comes with a cut, either when a building is demolished or you cut up in the head. What happens, though, is the realization, well, can we use this as an analytical tool for buildings that haven't fallen down, particularly the Pantheon? The Pantheon becomes a really interesting source where they're using the section drawings to try to figure out why it's still standing, 1,500 or more years later, and everything else fell down. Why did this one stand up, right? Or the Tempietto, trying to look at it in terms of how can we organize space. Right? What's interesting with both of these is that the section drawing, when it first starts, is not just a section as we know it with an elevation behind, but it's a section with a one-point perspective. Right? So it was a way of revealing, like the stage set, the world that was going to happen beyond the section in the project itself. Right? So it's fascinating that early section drawings aren't section pure, they're section perspectives. Right? You get the triad of the section elevation plan only about 100 years later, canonized by Palladio and others who were effectively arguing that the plan is the organizing principle. It's the largest one on the page. The elevation is here, and interestingly enough, the section, because of symmetrical building, only has to be shown in half. What for us is interesting is that the drawing of the same material cut in plan is shown as solid, but in section, that same line here is shown as light. Because what it's doing is it's privileging the space beyond, whereas the plan privileges the cut of the wall. Right? You already have, in some sense, a hierarchy set up between the plan dominant, the section is secondary. Right? And this is usually the case in architectural discourse and practice. Plan dominates, section is the resultant. We want to flip that. We actually want section to be a driver, equal sitting next to plan, as well as elevation. With the development of technology, section takes a way of really showing the relationship between the engineering and the architecture of the interior. You get greater sections of mountains. You get sections here, you get when the city starts developing its complexity, particularly the complexity of the metropolis, section is the only way to reveal and show how sewer systems, how power is going to be distributed, all the things underneath your feet that make up the city. And this becomes even more the way in which you understand transportation systems. And this is a map of New York City. And for us, one of the favorite things about this drawing from 1929 is that this is the proposed development of the Second Avenue subway, which is here. One spur of it was finished like 2 years ago. So it takes a little bit of time when you're building underground now. But what section allows is the combination of different levels and, more importantly, the ability to see through this drawing type things that are not visible to the naked eye. In our contemporary period, in which environmental and energy issues are drivers, section is the best place to examine thermal forces. In part because hot air rises. It's very hard to see hot air rising in plan. It's much easier to see it and to organize it according to the section of a building. All right? You get this combined with the scale of the human figures in the Buchholz McAvoy's drawings, plus the movement of wind, in this case the Venturi effect pulling across their screen, given the continuous winds in Ireland's project. The challenge, though, and we're educators, is when you go to reviews and someone has a really nice section, there's no really good language for the development of it. And I mentioned this briefly in the exhibition this afternoon, but for us it was foundational. But we felt that it was really important to elevate section, not just as a drawing type, but to connect it to a discourse, connect it to an organizing basis by which communication can be had shorthand between students and their professors, between practitioners, so that one can see and organize the way in which you design by having a shorthand. Right? Essentially a categorization system for talking about section. So this was one of the conditions of the book, is that we felt it was going to be important to be able to reduce in some ways all section types to 7 very simple types of section. We'd argue that these are the 7 things that can categorize all section types, plus hybrids, which is when one or more of these sections is operating simultaneously in the project. To really demonstrate this, what we did was to look at, we chose an arbitrary date of 1900 to effectively 2013-14 roughly buildings at that point, and chose 63 best examples that would demonstrate this heuristic system, this organizing system, this categorizing system, and at the same time show some of the more interesting sections that come from hybridization. We did each of them as one-point perspective section drawing. So the section is true. In other words, it is dimensionally measurable. All right? It is parallel to the picture plane. It is not in perspective. And then there is a one-point perspective located intentionally to reveal the latent thesis or condition of that project. In this case, the perspective point is way up here because it's in the vineyards of a building designed to rotate around its podium so that it can turn and always face the sun. All right? This is outside Verona. It's the village Aerosole. So that this whole thing, the staircase, literally rotates with the whole building. Right? Just so it's very clear, every project we did a section of is built. So you can go visit this. Right? And for us, it's a great example of how the site continues down here. That's all soil. This is the podium, and this is the lightweight structure that pivots around the landscape. So in one drawing telling the history, or the thesis of the arc of the project, a short history, the date of the project, and what kind of section type it is. And that's 157, which is the page I'm looking for. So what I'm going to do is walk through the 7 types, and then relate it how it is connected, how we think about section as a driver for projects in our own office. So extrusion, first type, the most basic system. It's literally planned, extruded, right? You literally lift it up. One of the best, clearest examples is the glass house, right? Where they're taking a plan, it's a single floor building, you take the plan and literally extrude the columns and you have one singular space. One of the things you can adjust in this type of section is the height. So for Netherby's project, you go up substantially high. You can see the scale figures here, right? For something that's basically 65 feet high, so that the extension of that height becomes a dramatic thing that you can control. Or for instance, in our project, we were literally limited to a single-story extrusion project by code. And this is for an early childhood education center in Arkansas. Adjacent to Crystal Bridges, on a site that was very open, effectively a single-story site. The challenge is that if you do an early childhood education center for 6 weeks to roughly pre-K, every single classroom has to be on the first floor and has to be directly exitable. So you can't put anyone on the second floor. Right? So we knew we were doing with a single floor plan that had to be efficient with a double loaded corridor because of budget, classroom here, and outdoor classroom exterior. Same thing on the other side. This is then the section. The challenge is then how do you use this condition, this constraint of the project as a driving condition so that you can really reveal even more about the process of the project. So we took the floor plan and spun it around a central core so that parents, when they're dropping off their kids, have a shorter distance and there's more control from the front for security purposes. And then located the 21 classrooms and designed within it a shaped figure that would be lower than that section, that would be in the shape of a house, to be basically a home away from home for kids who would literally be here more than they are in wait hours in their own house. Dropped off at 8 o'clock in the morning, picked up at 6. So it had to be a home, and that home was then a kind of felt clad acoustic canopy that extended out to the exterior, producing in the shape of the corridors effectively a series of houses, right, going down that corridor. Each of them, the classroom is directly connected to the playscapes, so you can take kids who are increasingly spending close to 90% of their time indoors and make sure that they want to spend most of their time outdoors, not inside, on the direction of the entrance going out to their playscapes. In the center, gross motor rooms, otherwise known as playrooms, would be more volumetric. You raise the height up, right? So it's almost a story and a half higher. And then one of the real challenges is how do you design the security around these playscapes so the kids are protected and you're not showing a giant chain link fence as the image of the building, right? Because that's what has to be wrapped around this spiked, essentially spoked condition. So what we did was extruded fairly sizable columns to the height of the building so that in fact it becomes a kind of decorative figure all the way around, marking the exact height of the building and becoming kind of figure in the landscape, particularly around the playscapes. It also then becomes a sculptural figure in a field adjacent to Crystal Bridges, pushed in the entrance, pulled out those fields, so in fact you basically get a welcoming column that echoes the thing that you see as you drive around as you're entering the building. Within the entrance of this, they're slightly deformed to accommodate different geometries. We call this the kind of the incompetent panopticon. Right? because none of these actually line up, which is intentional, so that you come in and you have a sense of play. At the heart of the building, this is the drawing of the incompetent panopticon. A competent one would have all the lines from the center clearly recognizable. Here, the point is you kind of meander around like kids and play in this active space at the heart of the project, with doors that can open up and allow those rooms to be part of a much more public space for Christmas pageants and other things. And this is currently the project. It's slated for completion in March. And these are the central areas showing basically the original section diagram. Extrusion, high extrusion. The next type of section is stack, and it's basically extrusion ad nauseum. It's the developer's wet dream. You take one floor and repeat it, and repeat it, and repeat it to maximize land value. Right? It's most architecture in this country. Right? It doesn't have to be just a repetitive skyscraper. You can adjust the floors, which is what Nice does, so that the lower floor here is much smaller, and the higher floors here are all held up above by the steel beams. Or you can stack them and adjust the relationship between the served areas, which is the labs, and the service floor, which are almost fully the standing occupiable spaces for the maintenance staff for Sol. You can organize space by stacking them so that you stack two floors like Leonardo Bardi does, where they're exhibition space over a giant public space, and then have other things drop down into the ground to negotiate the terrain of this particular location in Sao Paulo. Or in Start Van Vleck's downtown athletic club, the stacking takes on a kind of slightly, not absurdist, but a kind of programmatic condition that is masked by the self-similarity of the facade. But in here you get pool, you get gym, you get lockers, offices, etc. Point of note, that's not my brother's apartment. Or in MVRDB's version of this, the ecological landscapes get pulled together in the Hanover Pavilion in Germany for the Netherlands Pavilion. From our standpoint, we're really interested in kind of exploiting what happens with stacked conditions, particularly in trying to mitigating some of the negative conditions of pure extrusions, particularly in big box stores and suburban houses in which the giant roofs are there to produce the illusion of coherence of a series of rambling rooms that sprawl out on typically a single story or double story space. So we thought, well, what better thing to do than to just bring these two together, lift the residential over the big box stores, and see what happens with this new mating. You can actually have all your big box stores entered through here, the residential coming up through here, within the houses above, and the exact same structural system as the big box store down below. And this produces some interesting matings that we were hoping to reveal in section perspectives. Things like you can go down and get your lawnmower and then mow your lawn to test it out, then return it quickly if you didn't like it. Or you could have a sprinkler system for the big box store, be the perfect sprinkler system for your lawn. The excess heat would be in the north, here. In the north, you have green lawn year-round. You drive in exactly where the truck drives in all the commodities that you buy here and put them in your shelf and run above. So couplings that try to reveal in a speculative project through section the mating of these two conditions only would really reveal not in plan, but only revealed in section. And then the urban proposal that came off of that. In a more realistic project, we've been asked recently, and this is post-Sandy, to look at the redesign of the Steeplechase Pier. The Steeplechase Pier is in Coney Island. And before Sandy, it's essentially a boardwalk walking out with a crossing. But Hurricane Sandy did a number on most of these kind of structures around the Atlantic, and this is what it looked like afterwards. Essentially, the fact that the boards were all tied into the bulkheads meant that the boards literally became a giant sail, a battering ram, ripping up the bulkheads, which is where the money is if you replace this. The thing is 3 football fields long, right? So it has a kind of quality that comes from purely the accumulation of surface. But the interesting thing about Steeplechase Pier is it was never designed as a destination. It was designed so that ferries from Manhattan and elsewhere would bring customers to the steeplechase amusement park that would be on land. So they would come by ferry, use this, and extend out and go to the amusement parks at Coney Island. Right? Now that's reversed. So you now go out to the outside as a kind of walking, you go out to the water. So what we wanted to do was to try to keep this sort of tension, the sort of sense of history, but also have an opportunity to reinvent it within the framework. It's not it was something that we had a bit of a challenge to do. And this is a point for students in particular. We were given 1 week to design this. And 4 weeks to do the CDs, because it had to be open by Memorial Day. Sandy occurs in the fall. Processes occur. The mayor, Bloomberg, says this must happen. We get a completely different way of working civic projects by mandate, which is great. So what do you do in a week? So we realized the first thing to do is we had to think sectionally, that we had to radically separate the bulkheads down below and all the pilings and piers from the sacrificial decks, because another hurricane will come, that deck will be blown away. Right? Where most of the money is in here, not up in the deck. Right? So that these little points are little points of securing, so that if that gets ripped off, it literally rips off and they just put it back. It's timber. Up above, though, we had an opportunity to reimagine this building entirely. We did so by changing the way the benches were done. So the benches, in this case, acknowledged they were all against here. They acknowledged that people are people watching as well as looking to the outside. We also were able to produce a kind of wave bench for collective sort of sun tanning. And at the crossing point, we could introduce another, by just extruding a series of columns, a kind of sunshade, which they wanted in the program, but turn that sunshade through a series of metal tabs into something that if you're flying into LaGuardia or JFK, on a sunny day, you can see that it says Coney Island. We also anticipated that anyone fell asleep, they get a temporary tattoo. And at the end, this is where you're adjusting slightly the section. We really wanted that kind of, I'm the king of the world Titanic moment, where instead of acknowledging that people are now going out to see the water, particularly those living in New York, this is the kind of end condition. So what we did was lifted up the centerpiece only, and then put a seat all the way around the outside, so that this didn't have to be guardrail height, that could be just simply a railing height. It didn't have to be 42 inches, it could be 36, because the fall was less than 30 inches off the outside. Right? This on the outside is 42 inches, and it has a kind of fishing rail. And this is really the point where you can look out, kids can look out without having a barrier, particularly small kids, to have that sense of view out, but also you lift it up so you can view back to the original purpose of this, which was access to the steeplechase and the amusement park, but which this is one of the few, the parachute jump is one of the few artifacts left. All just trying to adjust and play with section to its extent we can. And this is quite literally a man in a gorilla suit jumping off the side, which is, we're convinced he understood the pleasures of section. So. Shape is the third one, and shape is quite literally what you anticipate. It's the shaping typically of the roof, often for acoustic or structural purposes, but occasionally the shaping of the floor. In the Backspark Church by Utzon here, the shaping of the interior for effects of light and acoustic is radically different than the exterior skin here, so that the ceiling is shaped, the skin is shaped. This is all about rain, this is about the interior environment. For Corbusier at Longchamp, we had to do not only examination and modeling to be able to make sure we got the roof right, but also in doing so realized that the rubble that they used, there was a church here that was demolished in the war, they used the rubble to rebuild it. That's what's in these walls. I always thought it was in these walls, and these walls are hollow. The super thick walls at Longchamp with the colored glass actually sprayed gunite onto chicken wire. And that's what's revealed here as hollow. And to do this, we have to do archival work to be able to make sure that what we're showing is as close as we can get to as-built conditions. For Claude Parent and Paul Virilio, may you rest in peace, is the slope floor. And the slope floor to reinforce a sense of community within this particular church as detailed shaping now takes on a whole structural and volumetric condition, so you're not only shaping the ceiling and floor, but also the walls through these essentially a series of catenoids. I think there are 58 catenoids that interrupt a series of stack conditions. In our own work, we've been hinted at how we've used shape to frame the houses, but we've also been very interested in using shape to help define spaces, particularly at a sizable scale. For a project for Claremont University, we were asked to turn essentially a service building into the administrative headquarters, into the home of the vice presidents and HR managers, the business operations of the consortium. It's about a football field long, column-free space that has there is a moment steel trusses, and we were asked to basically turn this into a desirable place to go to work. So one of the first things we realized that we've got all this embedded energy we want to keep, but we're going to have to radically adjust all the ventilation, bring us 160 plus solo tube skylights in, which is what's here, and make it essentially serve from the ceiling down. So we didn't want to interrupt the open floor. The next step is, well, how do you actually make a ceiling without just dropping it? How do you make that ceiling animate the space? So we had to work with essentially riggers for the movie industry to have them pin up, I think, 1,600 individual baffles that are acoustically padded on both sides that could produce essentially a new surface that can negotiate all of these requirements, but at the same time produce a dramatically new space on the inside. It would unify the space, but at the same time allow it to drop down to deal with some of the other mechanical issues. And for us, what was really important is this is in Southern California. You want to make sure you know where daylight is. So that the combination of electric light and daylight changes over the course of the day. You see clouds moving through. You see things dropping down. The electric light kicks up. So that if you're in there, you know that's a time lapse over the course of a full day. And here you can see we have no problem if you're looking out and seeing the mechanical systems. Right? There's a lot of energy put into it, but look at them. Why hide them? They're here. But it also means that we could shape the lower floor and produce spaces that could go from small gathering to full performance space, coupled with the idea that we had to radically transform the exterior. This is what it used to look like. Right? We had to keep the invested value in that and make it look like an inviting place for the town to come to. Right? So we did it by a 700-foot linear screen that's folded and shaped as it frames the outside space of the building, effectively changing what used to be just a shed into a welcoming place, producing shade moments for outside work, to extend the inside to the outside, and then becoming a kind of canopy for light that welcomes people, particularly for those in the town who will use the meeting rooms, the gathering rooms, the seminar rooms as part of the extension of their services. And an entrance space that was effectively redesigned by just this one thing, trying to do as many things as possible by changing its shape. For other projects, there's another project where we worked on ceiling. What we literally had to work on was the ceiling. Right? We couldn't really touch the floor, couldn't really touch the walls because it's a historic building. It's a McKinney White building at Columbia University. This is where they gave out the Pulitzer Prizes. And this is the space that they used to give out the Pulitzer Prizes in. It looks like this. Right? So we were charged with really opening up, and you can see here the problem, right? You can't really see the tops of the windows. The space isn't inviting. It's not adjustable on a quick fly. And all of the systems up above are detracting from the quality of the historic space. So we realized we had to design something that would hold all that equipment, all the light, all the projectors, all the acoustics, all the fire suppression systems, while giving it a new image, recognizing its historic image simultaneously. So this was really inventing a new ceiling again, one that could literally drop down and canopy, holding back to the back is where the projector is, acknowledging the entrance, and then keep everything else on the floor open, changing it so that it can be the site for all the illumination, lighting integrated within that ceiling, The curtains, when they're pulled, are acknowledged as independent, so that there's clearly a kind of light soffit up there. And then we had to figure out how to make this as malleable as possible with really one or two moving pieces. The first was getting as much ample storage as you can. So these pieces, these walls fold, and become the place where you can move all the chairs that can be adjusted or put away, and then a custom stage that can change from being one person to multi-person to a central stage piece, all within that, and foldable and put away beyond that wall. Right? So that you're essentially trying to recognize through examination and section where you should work and where you should adjust. Shear is the next one. Shear is a little complicated. There are two different types of shear. There's vertical shear and there's horizontal shear. What I mean by shear, it's like you take a solid object, you cut it vertically, you slide it. Or horizontally, you slide it. Right? So they're working in relationship to each other. They produce totally different effects, though. But we felt that it was important to recognize them as adjustment between them, whether it's vertical or horizontal. The first, which is a horizontal shear, is a great way that Henri Sauvage figured out to make sure that every one of the apartments gets great daylight. Right? You literally slide the top one back, reducing balconies overlooking as opposed to a sheer wall, right? A cut wall. But one of the interesting things in this diagram is what you put in the middle, and that's what the communal pool is. Right? So the communal pool occupies that space required for all that horizontal shear to occur. Or in Bjarke Engel and JDS Architects, now big, the horizontal shear is fairly extreme, see the slope, so that you get really large terraces and underneath is a parking lot. And a funicular, literally a mountain climbing elevator that allows you to get to your apartments. For Barnard College, the Diana Center by Western Trading, the shear is a series of volumes going up so that the social spaces can all be linked through here. And in Neukölln, the shear occurs in a series of dramatic conditions, either going down, so it steps back that way, steps back that way. So it allows light in and allows people to come in and see what's happening in this facility. Vertical shear is different. It produces a kind of split section between pieces. So for Hertzberger's project for the Apollo schools, there was a capacity to not have to build an auditorium separate. The auditorium can be right in that section between these being split off. Right? It also means that the staircase connects these two wings and allows greater autonomy for the classrooms on each side. For Lewis of LTL Architects, that shear is super obvious at the front of the building. You walk in, you look up, and you look down. You walk in here, you can look up into this room, you can look down into the performance space, and as you go up into all these spaces, you can look across with a series of different things happening within the Center for Performing and Creative Arts, but the double skin of the glass, while allowing vision, keeps the acoustics separated between these different programs, often dealing with music and sound. We haven't had the opportunity to do as much vertical shear, something we're really excited about trying to engage. But in one project we have, we were asked to effectively link an apartment building that was an accumulation of different properties, which had 8 different levels to it. So instead of demolishing and allowing all those to be more seamless, we told the client, actually, what would be great is to make this the driver of the design. So we will locate a really interesting feature staircase that allows you connection from the entrance to this floor, to that floor, to this floor, to this floor, or on the backside down to the basement, off this level here, and that level at that point, and then the roof. Right? So that the stair can take on all these qualities of screening, animating, connecting, being the very thing that allows views or including those views in addition to allowing circulation as you move up from the lower levels all the way up to the upper levels. So it's essentially seeing shear as a way of really, vertical shear particularly, as a way of animating views between different district floors. The next one is hole. And hole operates as essentially, as you anticipate, it's a hole in something, it's a board. Right? So it's really a kind of second order of sectional operation. You have that material there that you're voiding, but that void becomes the dominant piece. And this is as simple as Le Corbusier's Weissenhof-Siedlung, where the void allows double-height space to allow connections between state conditions, or the atrium-like void in the Larkin building by Frank Lloyd Wright that turns essentially work into a kind of moment of spectacle, a kind of cathedral of work, complete with an organ. And this, I think, is a modification to some extent of the Larkin building by Roach Tinklew, where the hole in the middle allows the Ford Foundation, everyone working to see each other, as well as seeing what's happening with the upper administration and dining facilities, which are located up at the top. Plus views to the East River, just through that glass. In the Marriott Marquis, you've got Hull as the central. Has anyone been? Well, if you go to New York, this is the cheapest free ride you can get. Get in these elevators and take them all the way up to the top, and you'll experience sectional Hull spectacular. Right? You come out of here, you go through a little hole, and all of a sudden you're in a giant Ford with these views looking through these stacked accumulations of rooms out to New York City. Right? Really, really amazing views. And then you pay $15 for a beer. Right? You gotta pay for the ride somehow. The next one is the Senate Mediatek, and here the holes are literally driven through the plan and then inserted with a series of structural pieces that could not only support all the floors, but actually become the places for circulation, for all the services, for all the things that need to go up between the floors, and provide visual connections between these different district Mediatek floors. In our own work, we've used Hull as a way of thinking about how we're going to work on renovations, transformations of existing places, so that we could use this to change what used to be a theater in Austin to a department store to now a contemporary art center by thinking about our work as a series of tactical insertions and removals. So these are the tactical additions, and the removal is literally allowing that space, that hole where the staircase to exist inside the building, coupled with making certain that that void on the outside of the building, that window is a dramatic piece, becoming, to some extent, the image of art house at 7th Complex. When you enter into the lobby, what you immediately see is the staircase. And it's cut into the building, essentially allowing you to see up through into the piano nobile. The staircase treads extend down and become the desk, so that you know exactly when you get your ticket where you're supposed to go, without having someone tell you, because it's obvious that you're supposed to climb over there. But more importantly, it allows the Texas light to draw down in, filling that and animating that space that is produced through the hole. The angle of each of these treads is at the legal angle of the riser of a stair, so that those follow the logic of the stair, but more importantly, allows a kind of dramatic connection between two floors that were previously really only accessed from side stair and an elevator. This caused a bit of a problem when you talk about holes for contractors, because they tend to like to build them up first. But in this case, we actually had to keep the hole open because the contractor, which is this guy, was putting all of the timber in, and they were all coming in as single pieces. They had to leave the building's hole open so they could drop them in, because there's no other door big enough to be able to slot them in. And you can see this caused great joy on the contractor, who had to figure out how to get them to fit between basically 2 points of connection, one up there and one here. So it's held by 2 points. Giant hockey pucks. And this is the stair from the back side, stair from the top side. It actually intentionally tapers because the angle of the side is equal to the angle of the inclination. So as you go up the stairs, it gets wider, because there's less of an angle for the rake of the side, opening up to the piano nova above. These are all Michael Moran's photographs. A lot of the photographs were taken by him. It's really critical for picturing the work in a way we work in collaboration, so I can show it to you without drawing. The other literal hole is, well, that. You cut a hole. When we've done the renovation subsequently, when Art House became the Contemporary, they wanted a giant lift because they wanted larger art that would fit in the elevator. So we put a giant scissor lift in, So you can lift art up, so it's literally a hole through the road. Right? And then that drops down and comes to the floor, and then you close it up so no one falls into the hole. Up above, we had a rooftop under the first renovation. The second one, they said, we really want to make this usable all year round. So even when it rains, because it was a very popular site, particularly for events and weddings, etc. What we realized is that one of the things we wanted to keep was the deck. And we wanted to keep that sense of open connection to the rest of Austin, but we wanted to provide protection. So the logical thing is to extrude as thin a roof on as thin a columns as you possibly can, up to a height to protect it from rain, knife edge, so it looks like it disappears. I think that's 22 feet high. So it's a canopy over that rooftop that frames the art, the living industrial wall. Reveals at night as a kind of illumination to the building, and a perfect backdrop for the Women's March on the street. One of the challenges, though, is how do you protect from wind-driven rain? So with a 22-foot high roof, it's a little hard to just order a spec curtain, right? So we had to invent a curtain with a curtain hanger, working with sailcloth manufacturers to effectively allow them to close a curtain really quickly in case someone's having a wedding and it starts raining. So this is my brother pulling the curtain, which show how easy it is to pull, which in fact it is. And then a series of grommets that allow it to be pinned down below with break-off points when it hits a certain wind velocity. So all of that had to be organized in order to deal with the challenges of really high extrusions so that you can maintain this kind of dramatic transformation from daylight to diffused light on the inside, coupled with the capacity to be able to make certain that you still get views to the outside of Austin, animating parties, setting the stage, really linking this building and its social activities to the world beyond. The next one is incline. An incline is, as you'd anticipate, you take the floor, you incline it, connect it to another floor. It's a fancy way of saying ramp, right? But it's literally, you are inclining surfaces. Obvious example is the Lewis of LTL, where Le Corbusier does an incline from one floor to the next. Or in the Guggenheim, where one incline is the museum, where his belief is that you come to the top, and then the building would help you get to the bottom as you got higher looking at the art, instead of looking at the building. In the Kunsthal at OMA, the ramp is quite literally the piece that links all of it. The auditorium comes down here, links up to the galleries. At the same time, another ramp connects one part of the city down to the park. For our own work, we're really interested in how ramps can be used to hybridize seemingly dissimilar programs. And this is for the Venice Biennale of 2004, in which we were asked to really look at and reinvent the typical American parking garage. We found, well, one of the challenges of the parking garage is that the cars are, combustion engines producing toxic gas. So what happens if we used electric cars that didn't have potentially that negative consequence? And you can interweave the programs of parking and the upper program so that you can potentially drive up a skyscraper to the top. Right? Instead of parking just down below, you could drive literally all the way up the building. Right? People love their cars. Why not? We organized the program according to the relationship between parking and retail, dictated by code, with the least parking at the highest level, which is for residential. And then animate the program so that you get a big box store that literally is shopping until you drop. Right? Literally all the way through here. And then you have a hotel, motel, you have offices, and then housing up above. Right? This produces some couplings, and this is all through the idea of an incline. So if you can drive all the way up through, you can then have continuous programs. The advantage is in the big box store, there's no hunting for parking because all parking spaces are great because they're right next to the front door. Right? You park here, you take the escalator, you're right at the front door, you continue shopping, and then you shop all the way around. These are one-point section perspectives to reveal this. For the hotel, we can actually have the best of the motel. You can drive right up to your space and have the grand atrium of the urban hotel. So all of those combine together so that you don't have to, you can literally drive your luggage up, go into your room, then go over, gather into the collective space, go to the other parking spaces, and ultimately go to the pool and dive off upper here, which is in fact the driveway for continuing up to the other motel rooms, coupled with, and this is we acknowledge, no one would want to drive the slow path if they had bought a condo in the sky. So we put an express pass, so that you can high-speed your way all the way up. Up above here, you can see the high-speed ramps. We decided for those people that really love their car so much who wanted to live in the city, they would have to have a lawn. So we made sure everyone had a front lawn, they mow their lawn with electric mowers, coupled with lawn windows. You have to have fun when you're doing speculative projects, but not very much money. Nest is the last one, and this is literally taking something and nesting it inside it. And this happens in various forms. The most obvious one is this, where for Sun Fujimoto, for House 10, it's a Russian doll. Well, in Japan, but you have the living here, then you have the private area, and then above you have outdoors. It's literally exterior, interior, more interior space. Another form of nesting is volumes inside volumes. So for Charles Moore, for his own house, he would use the light gauge framing as a way of figuring the water and the sitting area, all with these sort of light canyons that would animate the space and sliding walls that would open up. For the project for Prada, this is one that Herzog Demeron introduced a series of nested volumes in other ways on one plate. Those are the changing rooms. They also help stabilize the building. And one of the things I'll note in this drawing is that most of the section drawings we didn't have foundational information. This one does, and this is quite literally the nesting of the building inside the foundation with dampeners and movement, so this entire thing can shake and move in the earthquake zone of Japan. So the nesting here is literally the full building on its foundation, as well as the nesting of rooms within the little volume. Great example of nesting by Kurt Bunchop at SOM, where you have rare books kept within glass, thermally controlled within light control, which are stone on the outside. For us, though, it wasn't just looking at this, it was also looking at what's necessary to allow this to be such a pristine space, because all the service spaces of the library are carried below with a hole put into the middle. The nest is the dominant condition. Nesting is really great for environmental performance if you have a very large place, because you can do a very large solar array so that you can deal with the climate control difference between outside air, semi-conditioned, and conditioned, so your delta is not from here to here, but is mediated between these zones. It's a really effective way of negotiating kind of in-between spaces. This is what we really started with on a project with Telluride, a competition project we worked on about 1.5 years ago, in which we were given essentially an existing shell. It's an existing shell of the transfer warehouse, stone. They wanted to put a contemporary art center in there for the community of Telluride, but maintain the historic walls. It's a historic shell. The roof had collapsed about 40 years ago, and was used for gatherings, impromptu gatherings. Really great to be outdoors in the summer, not so great when it's snowing. So what we felt we would need to do is not only draw and design through sections, and these are sections, this is walls and this is mine, but also think about this as a nested sectional condition where we would protect the integrity not only from the outside, but from the inside by pulling any interior volume inside from those walls. So those walls were revealed, allowing an interstitial gap between them that would allow us to deal with the thermal requirements for an exhibition where we could have temporary humidity control in a very arid climate, while at the same time allow temperature mediation in this zone, because the walls, the stone walls, won't allow you to control humidity in that museum level volume. This then drives the partie of the drawing, of the development. Stone walls, concrete foundation, timber figure inserted within, and then a glass interstitial layer, all added together to produce something that animates the stone, recognizes that the contemporary insertion is distinct, all black, in timber, and provides a kind of moment of being inside the stone, but outside the volume that's inserted, nested inside through section. We then allowed this to be its own climate-controlled zone, so you could change this. If this was inclement, you could pull the skylights across, particularly for snow months. And then at night, to be able to deal with dark skies, blanket them out so there's no light leak to be able to interrupt the flights of birds. For us then, this moment of friction of old and new comes about by the ability to nest something within it, but it also allows openings and views within it, essentially animating through holes, double height spaces, and then showing through a nested condition the relationship in section, showing through section the nested relationship. So you have effectively the stone walls and the concrete foundation here, the timber volume inserted into the ground and all the way back up to the rooftop at that point. Right? This then allows us to be able to show this connection and to anticipate the programmatic differences that would occur. So in the lower area where they would have music, they would have fleet foxes and band of horses simultaneously the same night, no problem. You'd have the concrete here and then the timber folding down to produce the acoustic isolation necessary for the performance. Walking up the staircase, you're literally in between the nested pieces, between new timber and old stone, raked by the light that's coming down from up above, and pulling your eye up to the main gallery space that is up through here, and then this becomes more of a neutral gallery space within the volume, with a few moments where we would heighten the tension between the old and the new, particularly here, where you literally drop down and have the old windows and the new windows in juxtaposition so you can see from the outside, as well as from top down, the relationships, not simply from a sectional diagram that the architects did. This is then the view from the outside, the old here and the new in between. Climbing up then the stairs, this is a kind of carving all the way up to the rooftop. And the carving of the rooftop allows you to go to see the sort of outside area and get that sense of vista out over Bridal Falls and beyond. And then of course we had to do a sectional nested box that would fold up so that we could then close it and ship it to them, so that they could, literally the box is an exemplification for the competition of the thesis of the project. The challenge, of course, is this didn't fit in the overhead. So we learned the problem with even the most well-packaged nested box is that the airlines literally take fragile and read, chuck, as far as you can. And we were up about 4 in the morning repairing the model. So the last one is hybrids. And I'm going to go through these just to show what happens when you mix these section types. Where there isn't a dominant one. So for instance, Rasana is definitely an extrusion. It's definitely shaped space. It's got holes in it. They're all producing a kind of complex building through the examination of that section. Or for Pango Kuma, here you've got a stacked series of shapes with nesting on top and holes brought together. Or for Parasite and Demeron, the shape of the houses for these display showrooms with Vitra, stacked on top of each other and then nested and inserted in between. For the art and architecture building called Rudolph, it's an extraordinary collection of different pieces all brought together. And we'll acknowledge the influence of his own drawings on our own work, because this drawing is very much taken from the vantage point that he did. His office did that drawing that is well known of this building. Or for Craft and Architects, stack and shape, you have a series of incredible number of offices in a university building in Milan, lifted up but severed so that light could kick down into the auditorium that was then sunk below grade for all the parking, and then light coming across field. So really playing with incredibly dense urban space to make this happen and work. And the last project I'll show is how we've operated on this kind of hybridization, trying to really transform a building that literally had a deficit of section other than stack. It was essentially a stack modernist building from the 1950s by Perkins and Will. We partnered with Perkins and Will to redo the project essentially almost 60 years later for Coney Island University. These are the section drawings, and you can see, with one exception, here they're pretty much a stacked set of extrusions. Right? And the facades reveal that. So we felt it was important in the transformation of this building to introduce section, precisely because section meant what they told us the program of the existing building didn't have, which is none of the researchers in a mechanical and aerospace building knew what each other was doing. They didn't have a connection from one floor to the other. The building didn't allow that. So we had to introduce a sectional continuity, and at those moments of sectional continuity, the corners here, here, and here provide moments of socialization through expanding the building, but we kept the exact same concrete foot because it was not only embedded in an urban context, the campus context, but it was one in which we wanted to preserve all the concrete that went in there for environmental reasons. So the 1950s, this is the original building. It had been accumulated with additional buildings around it, so it had lost its front door. So our role was to strip back, keep the concrete, extend out for the social spaces, and then add a super highly tuned facade on the outside, essentially an R26 on what was probably an R1 facade, to make the most highest performing building on campus. This is what it was before. You can see the ribbon windows reinforcing the kind of stacked condition of the design, and our transformation was to really open that up. To essentially open up through changing the way in which you enter it. Here you enter in quite literally through the fire stair, because the main entrance had been closed, and reopening that as the new entrance on the corner. Filling it with light, animating it, so you can see it visually at night. Ithaca, New York, where it does get cold and dark relatively early during most of the academic year. Above, we then cantilever out. We extend out a series of stacked lounges that would have views to the central of the engineering quad. And we changed these lovely double-loaded corridors that had no access to the daylight, but the only way you could treat them is literally get rid of them. Right? Was removing back to the concrete, cutting a big hole in the floor so that you're carving out, removing material to allow this double height space to exist so that you can connect the main floor and the floor of the engineering quad all together to pull everyone up, shown in this rendering to the main floor, and then in the actual construction photograph, connecting the buildings. One of the challenges in this building is that from one end to the other, it's a soccer field. Right? How do you make that walk seem delightful? Right? It's the connection from one side of the campus effectively to the entrance to the other side. So one is to make sure it's full of daylight and access. The other is to radically change the way in which you think about the shaped ceiling. We didn't have much depth to work in because we're existing with a floor plate is relatively low. But instead of just putting in a drop ceiling, we've changed the whole idea of what a ceiling will be within the topography, producing microcosms of the facade, so mini versions of the shape of the facade on the inside. All custom made so that we're accommodate the lighting, accommodate all the equipment, and the same produce a kind of extraordinary view that you know when you're on the main floor. Because you see that light, you see that ceiling that links from one side all the way to the other, while at the same time opening up holes that were cut into the space allow the social activities of the students, essentially maker spaces, to be revealed to the public that's walking this corridor. Right? Opening up those spaces through removal so that this kind of activity, it's spectacular in the lower floors, is actually put on public display. This is the corridor from the other side. On the other end, this is what it looked like. We really wanted to be able to change it, not only in terms of its look, but radically change the window-to-wall ratio. This is absolutely essential in northern environments to making a high-performance building. Right? This has 60% window-to-wall. This is 36%. Right? But it doesn't look like it because we put the windows where you need it, where the social spaces, not in the faculty offices, where most of the time they wanted to work behind desks, and the space of that office will be fully illuminated by a relatively small aperture, particularly one that has white frames around it that's bouncing light into it so that those are highly animated interiors through daylight. The wall is almost 2 feet thick, so that we had to carve back that wall to make sure that that daylight was getting in, to make sure that we were hitting the R26 performance overall. On the inside, we want to make sure that all these new lounges that we added are all connected. So the only way to do that, demolition, cutting through the existing slab of the building, so we could tie one lounge to the other lounge, allowing view and connection to the labs down the way, at the joint between this L-shaped building, where people could have impromptu gatherings, because that's actually where the innovation in research tends to happen, which is the happenstance, the unusual, the conversation that trips. You get out of your head, and all of a sudden you see it in a new light because you meet someone who's talking about something else. So this becomes the central hub for making sure the labs that are beyond are working as well as possible, at the same time allowing daylight to fill in where we could single load the corridors and no one can run into the public. Or where we couldn't, make sure that we're nesting volumes in so that graduate students feel like they're in a space as opposed to behind the wall. So that there's a sense of movement down this corridor, which meant that we had to really keep that ceiling as clean as possible to allow the systems to run beyond that soffit here. But that detail is key for making sure that that piece is read as a volume, not an embedded part of that wall. From the outside, opening and transforming it so that, in fact, this building, clad in terracotta, and the terracotta goes from being a kind of open spacing to a tight spacing, could indeed meet the requirements of a 100-year building with a super thick facade while using traditional materials in an absolutely new way on the outside to dabble the light, to animate it, to really make it seem like a vibrant place for study. Transforming 1950s buildings through section and thinking through section. And I'll conclude here by essentially acknowledging everyone that worked on this project. This is a 40-year project to do this book. And these are all the individuals that worked on it in a sort of map in the office when we had an opening party, which individuals, everyone projects they worked on was a red string that ties Regina Tang to all the projects, so she can trace every single one that she did. We worked on this project with student assistants, with members of our staff. Everyone who worked on the project was paid. And no one worked for free, no one worked voluntarily. For us, that's really important for academic work, that we acknowledge not only the work, but we compensate them for their time. Also realized that, our kids had to do something at an opening party, so we printed out, that's my son, we printed out a series of these section drawings, figured they'd color them. And they did, because we ended up getting with the only survived blue period. You have Harrison Demeron on acid. Utzon reimagined through the eyes of a 3-year-old. But ultimately we realized we turned this into a manual section coloring book. And it is an actual coloring book. I will say, though, that the coloring book costs more than the book. And we had someone hack our Squarespace account, and so we can't sell it online anymore. So that's the closest you might get to a manual section coloring book. So thank you very much for coming.